The last couple of days, I've been working on a video that means more to me than probably anything I've done. It's very personal because my sister wrote a story about us as kids growing up in the summertime up in the San Juan Islands on a private lake at a home or a cabin that my parents built that formed a bond for all of us kids that is unforgettable and probably one of the most important things that's happened to me in my life. And I've been reliving it here for the last 2 days and wanted to put this into her little book that she did. I wanted to put this into a video. And it is important to me, and it may not be as meaningful to you or to anybody like it is to me, but hopefully you had a childhood and experience like I was fortunate enough to have growing up. And I wanted to share the story, and hopefully you'll enjoy it.
Seawood on Fidalgo Island, Alexander Beach Memoirs, by Margaret Grondal.
To us, it was just the beach. When we said we were going to the beach, it meant our beach. It had a swimming lake and a salty stretch of fine, sandy beach on Puget Sound. It was the first division of the San Juan Del Mar community, a private beach shared with its members. It provided little more than glorified camping, but it was more than we could ever want. My parents bought the property in the 1940s as a family summer home. After constructing a sturdy one-room cabin, Dad decided to christen a name for our summer home. Seawood was carved onto a driftwood sign and hung from a bent limb. A bucket of white beach rocks provided a natural base. The cabin was painted pale chartreuse green, and we loved its simplicity and the way the windows latched shut and opened from a chain. The door unlocked with a skeleton key and creaked when opened. The stove kept us warm, and Mom boiled water and fed wood and paper for heat under heavy cast iron plates. A kitchen queen was used to store staples, and an oak icebox held the block of ice, picked up from the ice house in Mount Vernon along the way. The unlucky kid who sat next to the ice block got to shiver for 20 miles until we arrived. Our station wagon would be packed solid with my parents in front, our gear, bags of groceries, and our 4 outstretched bodies stuffed in flannel-lined sleeping bags, all sandwiched in the back with the family dog, always an Irish setter. Our station wagon afforded us the option to sleep during the journey from Seattle. Usually, we'd do our best to stay awake. On leaving, the choice was usually presented to us for a vote. Should we take Aurora Avenue, past the life-size cement elephant and the Jones Museum through Everett, or would it be the old Bothell Highway and onto Silver Lake with a drive through the giant hollowed tree? If awake and if it wasn't too late, we'd stop for a treat. Our favorites were either a huge dipped ice cream cone or a piece of 25-cent pie at the Village Cafe in Marysville, or giant chocolate malt at the malt shop in Old Mount Vernon. We looked forward to the trip and loved passing familiar landmarks that dotted the highway as we made our way north. When we went through Everett, we held our noses for as long as possible, not wanting to breathe the air fouled by the pulp mill we passed. When we were about to come to the drawbridge that took us to Fidalgo Island, the leaning bridge, named by our dad since it looked like it leaned to one side, we'd put our hands to our heads to hold onto our hats, or as Dad said, or we'd surely lose them. It was a game we all took part in, even our parents. You just did it whether you were wearing a hat or not. When we passed the new oil refinery, it was usually late at night and it looked to us like the land of Oz. I thought of it like the Emerald City, but Mom would always say to look at fairyland, glittering in fine white lights. Once there, we were lifted out of the car in our sleeping bags and taken into the cabin Dad had built. I would usually pretend to be asleep, as I liked to be carried in. It also provided an opportunity to keep my head in the bag until I knew a mouse wasn't running about the rafters, as I took the top bunk to my sister in the early years and the rafters were right above my head. If you had to use the bathroom when you arrived, it wasn't inside. The path was usually overgrown with stickers, and each summer, needed a new layer of sand. We had rusty metal flashlights that produced a faded light from worn batteries, and my brothers would point the eerie light toward the tops of tall firs and tell us that Tobor was going to jump out of the trees and attack. Little did we realize that Tobor was just robot spelled backwards. The anticipated threat was born of my brother's creation, some outer space fiction from the atomic age. On the trek to the outhouse, the night would be black, with the exception of the stars, and neighbors were few. Any sounds made to spook us, or any imagined fears, made the trip to the outhouse unbearable. After each arrival, Dad repaired the winding path with soft, cool sand so we could run barefoot into the woods quickly and down the path as fast as we could. Breakfast was usually pancakes, French toast, or an occasional waffle, and my brothers had contests to see who could eat the most. Most cooking was done over an outdoor fire, a pit with a cast iron top that served as a grill. To prepare the fire, we were usually sent 2 at a time to the beach to gather wood. If you returned with substandard smoke wood or bark, it was sorted out and you were marched back to complete your task. I carried my box and wore my mother's old wool coat to stay warm. I loved it, with its padded shoulders. It flowed long behind me, dragging on the ground, making me feel like a queen. Scant neighbors laughed aloud if they saw me, coat and box dragging by. I never liked our chore of filling a box with wood, but I loved exploring the beach. I'd constantly get distracted, seeing anew what had washed forth with the morning, and would usually return later than I should. Eventually, our morning fire would get crackling hot, and smoke would fill the air, and the beach would come alive. Running water was only from a spigot outside, and very cold. Hot water for washing was poured into metal tubs from the grill or heated on the wood stove inside the cabin. We had our own washcloths and towels and scrubbed ourselves clean. We brushed our teeth from our allocation of water into a paper cup. Soon, in the distance, we would see other cabins with smoke rising from chimneys. The fog was lifting, the day warming. After eating a hearty breakfast, we had to wait the interminable hour before we could swim. The fear of developing a cramp that could cause us to drown, the common belief, helped us count the minutes, and count them we did. We drove our parents crazy, asking repeatedly if an hour had passed. A condition to be met was to have the ability to swim the full length of the shallow end of the lake before we could progress to the deep end. If we made it to the telephone pole by Helga's place, then we graduated and were permitted to dive from our slippery, hollowed cedar logs and the wonderful diving board. We played King of the Mountain, slipping on and off our floating logs, and practiced our swan dives, jackknives, and cannonballs. We often tried to touch the deepest part of the big lake, where we could sometimes dislodge a bullhead fish with our toes. Our bodies would shrivel after long hours in the lake, but we built up huge appetites before we'd come out of the water. There was that awful hour to wait. That was the rule. We made our own ice cream, and we worked hard to turn the mysterious ingredients of rock salt, ice, chocolate, sugar, and cream into a smooth and thick confection. We took turns turning the crank as fast as we could. Our arms would feel like they were about to break, but our work would result in a big barrel of fresh ice cream shared by all the kids who came by to see what we were up to. We would sit at our red-painted picnic table, licking from high-topped cones, with chocolate and grins all over our faces. Life wasn't ever better. The same picnic table became a keyboard for me. It was humiliating, but I knew it was necessary if I was to stay at the beach. I had music lessons, and I had to be prepared. A long stay at the beach meant I had to take time to practice. My mother carefully drew the piano keyboard on the table, and I had to play the silent instrument. My mother studied my fingers as they hit the table, and if I didn't hit the right key, I had to begin again. Kids from the beach would come forth out of curiosity. What was I doing and why? Was I insane, or was my mother? I had to play the flat wood keys as I read the music, and to my mother's satisfaction, or what was the alternative? Even at risk of ridicule, the outcome seemed worthy. I was prepared for my lessons, and we didn't have to return home early to practice on the piano. We initiated the best baseball games around. We drew large diamonds in the sand when the tide was out. Our laughter would draw kids from up and down the beach to join in the fun. Our parents and any other adults were welcome to play with us. On rainy days, we had marathon Monopoly games that lasted for hours on end with lots of popcorn and licorice. We had a rowboat which eventually sunk, derelict of furs, and then later another, derelict too. We all became experts in rowing and getting to know every small shoreline nuance of our little man-made lake. Nights were full of bright constellations and black skies, and our huge bonfires could blaze all night. We'd sizzle hot dogs on driftwood sticks until they plumped, and we burned our marshmallows, eating them by the dozens. We'd entice the kids into a good game in the dark of hide-and-seek, called werewolf. It kept our adrenaline pumping as we hid between the logs and heard the growling of the werewolf as he, my brother, hunted for us. In all, we were allowed to be wet, dirty, sandy, singed, or waterlogged. We were totally free, and we were blissfully happy kids. Our beach was absolute paradise. When we had to leave, it was heartache and sadness. I'd wave the beach goodbye from the back of the station wagon as it carried us back to Seattle. Thinking back, each day brought new things to shore. Gnarled logs, wildly etched inscriptions in the sand, crab parts, shells, and heady translucent kelp in smelly serpentine shapes. With the sparkling light of morning, a rocky carpet would dress the shore with a covering of new beach glass and agate treasures. Our driftwood sticks carved vivid designs and messages in the wet sand. Dragging kelp or whipping each other with it was a favorite. Splashing through the tide pools was irresistible, wading across warm, steamy water, tickling the soles of our feet as we sloshed through the sandy rivulets. Sand fleas popped between our toes as we ran the length of the shore. We built huge forts from the vast driftwood debris that piled high on the beach. Sometimes cork and artifacts washed ashore, cast-offs from distant ships and fishing boats. It was comforting to believe it would never end. This paradise of ours was protected, like the knowledge that the sun and the moon would continue to rise and set in the skies, and our memories would remain forever. I don't believe our parents could ever know how much we loved our lives at the beach, or how grateful we were for it. I know that the four of us share a deep bond and unforgettable family memories for the good times we shared at Alexander Beach, our beach.
The Neighbors, May, Bert, and Grady, by Margaret Grondal.
May was exotic. She seemed to float as she walked toward our summer home, so poised with every graceful step. Her smooth black hair was pulled back tightly into a high ponytail that cascaded to her waist. It was an immediate facelift, as she was an older woman but beautiful, with black-lined cat eyes and a painted pink mouth. I loved her makeup and her flowing gestures. May was an artist, and she had a new husband. Bert was a younger man, tall and strong, a real John Wayne type, and now stepfather to May's son, Grady. They lived in a one-level waterfront beach house, and I loved to visit May and look at her paintings. I loved the feel of her casual, rustic home with canvas and brushes on easels, standing on a cement floor with a view of the sandy beach and sound. Grady didn't just play with the boys, he played with girls too, or anyone that would share his company. He was a bully, cocky and conceited, but we were fascinated by his seemingly adult and worldly ways, and he was always trying to impress us with his intellect. He wanted attention, and you couldn't ignore him. He had a confident presence and would talk to adults as easily as he would to kids. He'd sport a captain's hat that we'd look out our cabin windows, and if we saw smoke rising from his chimney, we knew he'd be down to our place before we'd finish breakfast. Grady had money and the latest toys. My friend and I once had to dodge shots from his BB gun as he took aim at us while we changed into our bathing suits in the community bathhouse. There was just enough space under the wood frame structure for him to shoot at our ankles as we hopped about, screaming. I don't think he believed we'd be really hurt because I knew he really liked us, but we were stung and limping and ran home to tell our moms what he'd done. Most of the time we thought he was nuts. Even when he knew we didn't especially like him, he was never indifferent and was always glad to see us. Somehow we understood that he needed us, and we usually had good times. Swimming, playing baseball, building bonfires, roasting hot dogs and marshmallows, or just walking on the beach together. Grady was the best on the diving board for making cannonballs. No one could beat his splash. I remember every 4th of July, he would have a fireworks display that entertained the entire beach community. We'd have a few sparklers and firecrackers from the local Indian reservation, but Grady put on a show that couldn't compare. He would say he had $50 of fireworks, which was a lot of money at the time, especially to be spent on something that would go up in smoke. His stepfather would buy him whatever he wanted. He was spoiled, but not naive that his love was being bought. He loved to brag about what he had, although I don't think the things he had ever meant anything to him. It just gave him something to talk about. Grady didn't ever seem to warm up to his new father when we were kids. He always called him Bert, and we thought it was odd. May had been married previously and widowed. Her first husband had been one of the original owners and partners for the San Juan del Mar properties when the community was initially being developed. She used to live one beach to the north in one of our favorite spots. Her former home perched high on the rocks, and we'd climb to what was left of it. All that remained was the concrete floor, the hearth and chimney after it had burned. We loved climbing up to that spot and did so every time the tide was out far enough for us to explore the hidden beach next to ours. We'd climb barefooted like goats over Rings Rocks to get to that beach and explore all the way down to the end of it to May's haunting ramparts. What used to be a small cabin looking out into the bay, high in the sky, with views west over the Sound. It still served as a beacon with its stark stone chimney. We'd play on the concrete floor as though it were our house, and imagine the walls and furniture as it must have been when May and Grady's father lived there. Later, in the 70s, Grady was a successful realtor and professional folk singer. My brother ran into him as he was about to play at a popular spot in downtown Seattle, and they recognized each other and chatted. As he became older, he mellowed and seemed sweet. I guess he had become comfortable in his own skin, no longer needing to act like the big shot we had known as kids. Grady died in a small plane crash over the Cascades when he was previewing property. He was only in his late 20s. We found out that he lived after impact, but died at the crash site. Knowing how strong a personality he had, and with his spirited ways, he must have tried very hard to survive. I was haunted by his tragic death and still am. It just never seemed like it could have happened to him, someone who was so strong and dynamic. We will never forget him.
The Neighbors, Mr. Montgomery, by Margaret Grondal.
Mr. Montgomery was a mysterious man rarely seen. He lived in a white house at the north end of the lake. He had the only home that looked like a Cape Cod, not the typical rustic cabin, and it seemed somewhat out of place. He swam in Lake Chiquita every morning at about dawn. I would hear the clicking of our noisy cabin clock and could see the iridescent glow of the radium numbers. If I was lucky, I woke from the rustling grass as he headed for the water, or from his splash. I'd wrangle out of my green plaid sleeping bag and get up on my knees to peek, peering over my shell and rock collection that lined the sill. Never did Mr. Montgomery hesitate, and no matter what the weather, his ghostly figure would appear, his blue, milky skin contrasting against his dark hair and black wool swimming trunks that clung heavily to his thin and wrinkled body. You could hear the splash as he dove into the shallow end of the lake to begin his short crawl through green patches of algae. I always wondered why he didn't swim in the big lake, as we called it, which was deeper, but guessed the shallow end was warmer at that time of morning. After watching him, I would hide in my sleeping bag, imagining the cold shock of the mottled water and thinking of old withered Mr. Montgomery as he slipped into the dark water. It gave me the creeps. Mom would laugh at me if she was awake and ask, "Is it Mr. Montgomery?" I was happy when I could catch a glimpse of our phantom neighbor. I know he never realized anyone was watching, but I watched as often as I could. Think movie. Creature from the Black Lagoon reminded me of Mr. Montgomery. Old Montgomery seemed spooky, and he gave me a thrill watching his bluish-white body slither into the steamy lake each morning.
The Neighbors, Eva and Bob by Margaret Grondal.
Eva's face was always deeply tanned, finely lined from laughter and womanly experience. Her blue eyes were striking against her dark skin and blonde hair, almost turquoise, and her thick tousled hair was always swept back with a pretty silk scarf. Lipstick was swept on in a glistening frosted coral, her fingers and toes brightly polished, and she'd gesture and throw her head back as she laughed. She was absolutely captivating and spoke with a hint of a European accent. Her scant outfits clung like a second skin to her robust bronzed figure, and her brown shoulders and muscled legs were usually bare. She was one of the most voluptuous women I'd ever seen. She worshipped the sun and consistently lusted in its heat. She belonged at the beach with just as much right to it as the fine sand and shapely driftwood. She didn't look or dress like mothers we knew. She possessed a natural ease, a confidence expressed in slow, liquid motions. She could sizzle without trying, and my brothers took note. But Eva was hardly ordinary. She pulsed with a body of pleasure. Eva had a lover. Bob was much younger, handsome as any movie star we'd seen in any movie or magazine, and it was apparent that she and Bob shared passion that we didn't seem to detect easily in our parents. It was said quietly that Bob was married and unable to divorce, but we knew he loved Eva, and that's all that seemed to matter to us. Eva lived in the aptly named Vagabond House at the north end of Lake Chiquita. Not only did she have the coolest beach house in the 50s with vaulted ceilings supported by large timbered beams, but she also had the most enchanting guest cottage on an adjacent lot she owned. The cottage was next to our cabin and had a rough cedar shingled exterior and bright red trimmed windows. Perfect, I imagined, for lining the sills with my collections of shells and rocks. And I fantasized that the guest house could be mine someday. Eva's beach house seemed a perfect retreat for the lovers' rendezvous. My mother would stand by the side of the dirt road that encircled the lakefront to greet Eva and Bob as they'd come to say hello. I'd hang on to their conversations, trying to participate in the lovers' world. Each time we'd arrive at the beach, I'd look out the cabin window to see if Eva and Bob had arrived during the night. If Bob's beautiful Jaguar was in their driveway, all seemed right and romantic. As little girls, my girlfriend and I would try to imagine what passion awaited us as we became grown women. We envied Eva's worldly ways. We wanted to be recklessly in love like Eva and Bob, living with abandon and uninhibited. We wanted to lie in the warmth of the sun and life, as she seemed to. I had fine blonde hair, not like Eva's thick golden waves, but it was a dream to reach an age when I would become a woman with a woman's full body, wear sparkling coral lipstick, and carry it off with pleasure, like Eva. Eva and Bob stayed together for most of 40-some years. Bob completely devoted to her until Eva left this earth to likely melt another planet with her lusty energy. This epitome of woman was one to remember.
I want to thank my sister Margaret, who wrote this wonderful story. And it's all true. This is things that happened when we were growing up in the summers at our beach place. Very special memories to myself and to my siblings. We all shared these experiences. A lot of these things I'd forgotten, long forgotten, and reading my sister's story brought back a lot of memories that were wonderful for me to relive. So I did really enjoy producing this, and I hope that you enjoyed it too. And I hope that you have good memories like I do, and hope that you are enjoying your life after 70. Thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you again. Thank you.